Hello and welcome back to Planet 40k. Today we've got another review and advanced tactics video for you. This time we're going to be doing the Immortals from the Necron Codex. So this is now episode 3 of the series. We've done the Scorpic Lord as well as the Canoptic Scab Swarms. So if you missed the other 2 episodes, go back and check them out, then come back to this one. So let's begin with the datasheet for the Immortals. They're coming in at 17 points per model, and you can get 5 of them as a minimum unit, all the way up to 10 models in the unit. So a maximum unit is going to cost you 170 points, whereas if you're just taking 5, it'll only be 85 points, which are cheaper than a min unit of warriors, which are the other option in the troop selections. So in terms of the actual stats that the Immortals have, they've got a 5-inch movement, weapon skill and ballistic skill value of a 3+, strength 4, toughness 5, wounds 1, attacks 2, leadership 10 and a 3+ armor save. So the main stat of note out of all those statistics is the toughness being a toughness value of a 5 as opposed to a toughness 4 like the warriors have. That's going to make them very tanky, especially when you're holding objectives and things like that. Primaries as well as secondaries, of course. So faction keywords, they've of course got the Dynasty keyword. They're going in any of your dynasties, quite standard there. They're an infantry model, so they're going to synergize with secondary objectives and other aura buffs and stuff like that. And then finally, they're a core unit, so they're again going to interact with the Codex with synergies, with the Overlords for example. All the synergies that interact with core models. So ability wise, there's only really 2 of note here. The first one being the reanimation protocols, which does work quite well because they've only got 1 wound per model. However, you've only got a max unit of 10 of them. So reanimation protocols is going to work well on them, but it would definitely work better on a max unit of warriors because you've got 20 in a unit, or flayed ones of course, that works the same, as opposed to having 10 immortals. And to be honest, you're not likely going to be taking 10 immortals, and you'll see why later in the video. Then the second ability is also quite standard. It's the command protocols. If they're within 6 inches of a character model and you've got a noble on the table, you get to use one of the directives of the command protocols. Some are useful, some are not. Again, we'll talk about that later in the video. So war gear wise, they've got nothing in terms of melee weapons, although they do have 2 attacks per model, which is pretty decent. For a unit that doesn't really do much in melee at all, that's not too bad. And then they've got the 2 options at range. So you've got the Gorse Blaster, which is a 30-inch range, rapid fire 1, strength 5, -2 AP and 1 damage. So of course with that rapid fire within 15-inch range, you're going to be able to fire 2 shots per model as opposed to 1. But even if you're at 30-inch range, that's not too bad going for a straightforward light infantry weapon. So you want to be taking the Gorse Blasters. If you're going up against factions such as Space Marines for example, they're an obvious example there. You want to be taking 2 AP off of their armor save, putting them into a 5+ armor save. Whereas the second option is the Tesla Carbine. Now it's only 24-inch range as opposed to 30-inch range, but it is assault 2. So you're getting your 2 shots right up to 24-inch range. And because it's an assault weapon, you can actually advance with them, although it will be at a -1 to hit penalty. So the ballistic skill will go down to 4+. Now the strength is the same as the Gorse Blaster, which is strength 5, but this time it's got no AP and only 1 damage again. So this is going up against the more weaker options, weaker factions such as demons for example. You don't need to take any AP off of those kind of units. Things like Orc Boys, Termagants, Hormagaunts, things like that, you don't really need the AP. This is where this Tesla Carbine comes in handy. Now what's good about the Tesla Carbine, like all other Tesla weapons, if you roll a 6 to hit, you get 2 additional hits in the pot. So if you do the maths of that, it's almost like you're automatically hitting, although you do have to roll for it of course. But mathematically on average, you'll get the same amount of hits back as you've rolled. Not always of course, but averages are averages. So there are 2 weapon options now. Of course it would help if you knew who you were going up against in terms of the faction. But if you didn't, you're probably better off going with the Gorse Blasters. This is a safer option there, and it's got the better range as well. So before continuing on with this video, I just wanted to get our sponsor in here, which is the Magnet Baron. Our friends at the Magnet Baron, they've got another product to show you today, which is the large pin vise. So this is a pin vise that allows for drill bits that are 0.5mm right up until 8mm. So any of those bits are going to be able to go into this vise, which is going to massively help with your magnetization of your models. So if you need those holes doing, you get your bits, put them in this drill vise, which is going to take almost any size. So you can get this vise for $10.99 in US dollars, and they ship worldwide as well. So get on board, $10.99. The link will be in the description below. That's the Magnet Baron. Check them out if you haven't already. Back to the video. Okay, so let's talk about the role for the Immortals when you're playing a game of 40k. So again, I've got 4 roles, very similar to the Scab Swarms we did in the previous video. The first one being that they're going to be very good backline objective holders. Any objectives that are in your deployment zone or just out of the deployment zone, they're going to have that toughness 5, so they're going to be holding onto those objectives very firmly with reanimation protocols and a 3+ armor save as well. If they manage to get into light cover or a terrain feature, even better. But they're going to be holding on to them objectives pretty well. Then the second thing, which is quite similar to the first, is the fact that they can do actions. So your secondary objectives which we're going to be going over later in this video anyway, but they're going to be doing those secondary objectives because they're only 85 points. It's not that big of a points expenditure when you're talking about scoring secondary points. The third bullet point here that I've got for you today is the fact that they're just going to support with your range attacks. So if you've got, say, a 20-man warrior blob, shooting their Gorse Flayers or their Gorse Reapers into a unit and they don't quite finish the unit off, you've got your Immortals there with their 10 shots or 20 shots depending on the distance. They can finish off a unit. So they've got that added support in terms of the range capabilities. They're not going to remove loads of models with their shooting attacks, but they're definitely going to take a model or two within the game. Then the fourth bullet point here I've got in terms of their role within the game, which is quite standard for the most of the units that stay back, which is just to simply spread them out and screen the back lines. Now of course for deep strike units or tunnelling units or any units that are coming from strategic reserves, they need to stay 9 inches away from enemy models when they're coming inbound. So if you've got models that are spread out such as Immortals, that's going to have a 9-inch radius all the way around the unit, which is going to cover off a lot of the board. So if you've got multiple of these units, one on each side perhaps, that's going to be a large bubble both ends and prevent a lot of deep strike models coming in to your back lines. So stratagems that are available to the Immortals, there's quite a few here because they're an infantry model and they're a core unit. So let's check out some of the options that they've got available. Now the first two options I'm not going to go too deep into, which is the Dimensional Corridor and the Prismatic Dimensional Breach. So both of those options relate to some sort of transport model. That's your Monolith and your Night Scythe. So we'll talk about that in the synergy section later in this video. But the main stratagems you're going to use with your Immortals are the ones that relate to their range capabilities. So you've got the Disintegration Capacitors, which is only 1 command point, and any unmodified hit rolls of a 6 will automatically wound the target. So if you've opted to take 10 of them as a max unit, they're going to have 20 shots if you're within rapid fire range. Now out of the 20 shots, on average you're going to score 3 6s, which will automatically wound. Now I probably wouldn't use that stratagem for them. I'd save it for 20 warriors or my Tomb Blades, probably not for 10 Immortals. But if you're taking the Tesla Carbine, you've got the Malevolent Arcing stratagem for a command point. And this one does a little bit more damage because of the mortal wounds. So all units within 6 inches of the targeted unit, you get to roll a d6 on, and on a 4+, that unit's going to suffer a mortal wound. So if they're factions that are quite clumped together, again I'm going to use Tyranids as an example here, those clumped together kind of factions, you're going to be sprouting off quite a lot of different mortal wounds throughout lots of different units. The next one, which is Relentless Onslaught, kind of relates to the Gorse Blaster again. We're going back to that weapon. For a command point, when you fire in your rapid fire weapons, an unmodified hit roll of a 6 will score an additional hit. Now if you're pairing this with the Disintegration Capacitor stratagem, those 6s that give additional hits will not automatically wound. They have not been rolled for, they are separated. But you can combine the stratagem if you wanted to for 2 command points. I probably wouldn't do it. Again, save it for warriors and things like that. Then the last option I wanted to mention today, which is the Solar Pulse. I don't use this one often enough to be honest with you, but you can be removing the benefits of cover from a unit for only a command point, which is going to of course aid your Gorse Blasters because that -2 AP will be a -2 AP. They're not going to be in light or dense cover because you removed the benefits of cover. So that's the stratagems all dealt with. Let's move on to the Dynasty Code. So in terms of the 6 generic Dynasty Codes, there's 3 that work pretty well with the Immortals in particular. The first one being the Mefrit Dynasty of course. If you shoot within half range you get the extra AP, extra -1 AP, and then furthermore you get an extra 3 inches to your ranged attack. So all of a sudden you've got a 33-inch ranged Gorse Blaster or a 27-inch range Tesla Carbine. Something worth noting here while we're talking about the Mefrit Dynasty is their stratagem. For only 1 command point you can opt to use Talent for Annihilation, which is an unmodified wound roll of a 6 will inflict a mortal wound to a maximum of 3 per phase. This is going to work really well if you've got an Overlord buffing the unit with that My Will Be Done ability, so they're hitting on 2s, so that you've got as many wound dice in the pool as possible before you actually roll. Then of course on average you're going to roll more 6s to inflict mortal wounds. The second one of note is my personal favourite of course, the Nihilak Dynasty, having objectives secured. Now these are going to be a backline kind of unit, so they probably don't need it, they've already got objectives secured anyway. But with Nihilak, troop units are going to be considered as 2 models for the objective secured rule as opposed to 1. So any deep strike units, alpha strike units that are trying to steal an objective in your back lines, they're going to have a hard time doing it when you've got this Dynasty Code. Then furthermore, if they're within their own deployment zone, -1 AP weapons are going to go down to a 0 AP weapon, which is going to give them a little bit more resiliency within the game. Then they've got their own personal stratagem, which is Reclaim a Lost Empire for 1 command point. You can simply do actions and still fire your weapons because they're an infantry unit, which is going to be really helpful for your secondary objectives of course. This is going to be a unit that's most likely going to be wanting to use this kind of stratagem because they want to be firing their range attacks all while doing actions at the same time. Then the third one to note here in terms of the 6 generic dynasties is the Sautek Dynasty. Now you're not going to be using the Tesla Carbine if you're using the Sautek Dynasty, you're going to be using the Gorse Blasters with a rapid fire weapon. With rapid fire of course if you're shooting within half range, you get 2 shots. Now the Gauss blasters have got a 30-inch range, so that would be 15-inch half range, whereas if you're playing the Sautek Dynasty, that 15-inch range goes up to an 18-inch range, so you're getting 2 shots at 18-inch range, which isn't too bad at all. Then if you wanted to boost your range capabilities with their stratagem, they've got methodological destruction. When you finish shooting at an enemy unit within that phase, all other units within your army are going to get a +1 to hit against that particular enemy unit. Now if you're going with the custom dynasties, from the dynastic traditions, there's 3 that I'd select from. The first one, of course, Eternal Conquerors. I'm always going to be mentioning that one. With objectives secured, you can't really go wrong if, of course, they're troops, very similar to the Nihilak Code. Each model is going to be considered to have an additional model when determining who controls an objective. So that's the first one I picked from there. The next option from that list is the Immovable Phalanx. So this is helpful for units in the backline such as your Immortals that are not going to be moving that often. Now damage 1 weapons that are targeting those Immortals that haven't moved are going to give your Immortals a +1 to your armor save. So now all of a sudden you've got 2+ armor saves on your Immortals, providing that you've not moved them. So the third one on the list is Pitiless Hunters. Now because they're an infantry model, if they remain stationary, it doesn't matter whether it's 30 inches away, they're always going to get rapid fire. So it has a very similar feel to Bolter Discipline for the Space Marines there. If an infantry model stays stationary, they get to use rapid fire regardless of the distance. Then moving on to the second list, which is the Circumstances of the Awakening. So there's 4 options that I've chosen for the Immortals here, the first one being Isolationists. So if you're firing with the Gauss blasters because they're a rapid fire weapon, the strength is going to go up 1 to a strength 6 if they're firing within 12 inches. So again, this is going to help if you've got enemy deep strike units coming in into your backlines and your Immortals are ready within 12 inches. They're going to have strength 6 weapons, so that's going to be really good against Death Guard, for example, that toughness 5, and all the other toughness 5 models within the 40k game. Healthy Paranoia is another one. It's very similar to the Mephric Code. You're going to get an additional 3 inches to your range capabilities, whether it's your Tesla Carbine, whether it's your Gauss Blaster, you're going to get 3 more inches. Not too bad. The third one in the list, which is the Rise of the Interlopers, is basically very similar to the Disintegration Capacitor stratagem. Any 6s to hit will automatically wound the target. This is working on all your infantry units as well as all your biker units, but of course your Immortals are infantry models, so it's going to work on them just fine. And if you've got loads of them, even better. Then the last one, of course, is Relentlessly Expansionist. That 6-inch pre-game movement can get you onto an objective that's just slightly out of your deployment zone, or you can just get you into a terrain feature to get that light cover or dense cover. But army-wide, that's probably one of the best options there, isn't it? Relentlessly Expansionist. If you're going custom, I pretty much always use that one. Okay, so let's talk unit size. What's the best unit size when you're going with Immortals? Now there's only 2 options in my opinion. You're either going for a min unit of 5 of them for 85 points. They're going to be doing secondary objectives. That's their main role when you're taking 5 of them. They're not going to be removing too much off the board. They're pretty much action monkeys at that point. 85 points is pretty cheap for getting secondary points. But the other option is to go max with them with 10 models in a unit for 170 points. These are almost your warrior replacement because they've got better capabilities in terms of the range attacks. They've got that 30-inch range as well as having that -2 AP with the Gauss Blaster. Or the Tesla Carbines as well is another option that the Warriors simply don't have. So that's just a simple case if you prefer having 20 Warriors or 10 Immortals. I personally will go for the 20 Warriors in this case. They've just got more resiliency, especially with the reanimation protocols. But in terms of the unit size for the Immortals, I'd pretty much always go with the 5-man unit. It fills up your detachments quite nicely if you need troops. I find myself not wanting troops that often, but when I do need troops, you want to go cheap and cheerful. 85 points, job done. So deployment, we've already kind of discussed it already in this video. They're going to be on your back lines. They're not really going to be advancing too far up the board. You might want to Veil of Darkness 10 of them in a unit. They're better served on a larger unit such as your Flayed Ones or your Warriors or your Scorpet Destroyers. A unit like that that's going to go on the offensive. The Immortals are more of a sit back and shoot kind of unit. They're going to be on your primary objectives. They're going to be doing secondary objectives with actions. But mainly it's about backline scoring, especially because they've got that toughness 5, which makes them quite resilient. The third way of using them is to simply screen off your heavy vehicles, your heavy monsters, such as your Canoptic Doomstalker, your Doomsday Arcs. They do need screening. Now you do have options with the Canoptic Scourge Swarms that they can do that for cheaper, but some players like to run those up the board, stealing objectives with them, whereas your Immortals are going to be a sit back kind of unit and they can still do the screening as well as scoring points. But the one thing I definitely wouldn't do with these guys is strategic reserve them. I definitely wouldn't pay the CP to put them in strategic reserves. They don't need to go into reserves. There's other units that are just much better at coming out of reserves and doing what they do best, whereas these guys, like I keep saying, they need to just stay at the back, hold objectives, hold the fort for a pretty reasonable price. So let's talk some synergy then. What is the best synergy for your Immortals? So the obvious one is going with one of the Overlord kind of models, especially the ones on foot. You don't really need a fast Overlord such as a Catacomb Command Barge. That's going to be way too fast for your Immortal, so just a basic Overlord on foot will be more than enough for an Immortal unit. Now with their My Will Be Done ability, that gives the Immortals a +1 to hit when they're firing their weapons. And of course if you're giving them the fair on keyword, then you can be doing this on 2 units as opposed to one of your Immortal units. Then further to add to the synergy for an Overlord model, you've got the option of the Resurrection Orb or the Relic Orb, which is the Orb of Eternity, to be bringing them back with the reanimation protocols when they've dwindled down. But you're probably only going to be using that with a max unit of 10 of them. Doing it on a min unit of 5 of them is just definitely not worth bringing an orb for. And then you've got the outside of the box kind of option, which is the Veil of Darkness relic. You can take 10 Immortals with the Veil of Darkness and an Overlord across the battlefield. A fairly resilient unit with toughness 5, holding an objective in their backlines as opposed to yours. Not a bad way of going. However, I think I prefer to do this with Lich Guard. You can either take them with the in-1 save with the shields, or take them with the War Scythe so they're doing a bit of damage on the go as well. But if you did want to play a lot of Immortals in your list, why not? Now if you wanted to go for a cheaper Resurrection Orb carrier, you can also take the Necron Lord, which is slightly cheaper than the standard Overlord of course, but he's not going to have an in-1 save with a phase shifter, so just be aware of that. If you're going to be putting a 30-point Resurrection Orb on a character, at least give them an in-1 save. If you lose that character and you've not popped the orb just yet, you're going to lose the orb as well, so make sure that character is resilient enough to hold on to it for a fair amount of the game. So other synergy within the Codex, you've got the 2 Technomancers. So you've got the named Technomancer, which is Illumina Zarez. He can use his augmentation ability, so he can buff these guys up because they're a core unit. Now it is a random roll on a D3, but you can be adding to their strength, their toughness, or their ballistic skill. So 2 out of 3 of them are not actually that bad. The strength is the one that you probably don't want. You don't need the strength, you don't need the melee attacks with Immortals. But the ballistic skill, as well as the toughness, is going to be pretty handy. And of course the Rites of Reanimation ability, which is going to be on the model as well because he's a Technomancer. And likewise, if you are bringing an actual Technomancer, he's got that same ability, Rites of Reanimation, although he can only use it once, he can't be using it twice, unless you're using that stratagem of course. Then if you wanted to dive into the Cryptic Arcana for your Technomancer, you've got the Hypermaterial Abilitar, which basically gives them light cover if they're being targeted by more than 12 inches away with ranged attacks. I probably wouldn't take it, but you've got the option there if you want to do it. Other synergy from your characters is the Royal Warden. With his adaptive strategy ability, he can be pulling them out of combat so they can fall back and still be able to fire their range attacks. Now again, if you're doing this with a 5-man Immortal unit, it's probably not worth it. 10-man unit, yeah, it might be. Probably better served on a 20-man Warrior Blob though in my opinion. Then some synergy with some vehicles within the Codex. You've got the Triarch Stalker. So he's got his targeting relay, so you shoot with the Stalker first. You always shoot with the Stalker first. If you've got a Stalker in your list, shoot with the Triarch Stalker first. So many times in the game I've forgot to shoot with it first, and I've realised halfway into my shooting phase, why haven't I not shot with the Triarch Stalker? Because what happens with his targeting relay, once you hit a target, and it's very important that you hit the target, everybody else within your army that's targeting that unit gets to reroll once. Very important there, especially if you're using that My Will Be Done ability on your Immortals, so they're now hitting on 2s and rerolling ones. So don't forget to shoot first with your Triarch Stalker is what I'd say. Then the last bit of synergy with other units within the Codex is the Night Scythe. You could stick some Immortals in a Night Scythe because of course they're infantry models, but you don't have to stick one unit, you could stick a few units. Why not stick 2 or 3 units of Immortals within there? Then the Night Scythe can simply just fly around, dropping them out one by one onto objectives. With the Nihilak Dynasty or Eternal Conquerors, you're going to be stealing objectives. Is it the best way of using a Night Scythe? Probably not. You're better off using Lich Guard with Vanrak the Traveller for example, something like that. But I'm just giving you the options here. And before we get on to the next chapter within this video, I just wanted to talk about the protocols. Now as you know already, I don't really rate the command protocols that highly, but there's a couple that will work with the Immortals, the first one being Protocol of Eternal Guardian. If you simply don't move, don't advance and don't fall back, you're going to get the benefits of light cover. Okay, not too bad. That's with Directive 1. Then if you're using the Protocol of Sudden Storm, I'd go for Directive 2, because you can perform actions and still fire without the action failing. That's probably one of the only command protocol directives that I like out of all the command protocols. Doing an action and still being able to fire without it failing is pretty big. Let's talk about the secondaries and what secondaries you're going to choose for your Immortals. Now as we've already mentioned, Immortals are very important in terms of scoring secondaries, especially in your backlines, in your deployment zone. So here's some of them that I'd be taking if I've got lots of Immortals on my list. There's plenty of options in the Shadow Operations list because they're an infantry unit. The first one worth a mention is Raise the Banners. That's a very easy one to do for your Immortals in the backlines because they're an infantry unit. You just raise the banners straight away, turn 1. Now it is only 1 point per banner per round. These will start to build up quite quickly, and it will also force your opponent to come and take those banners down in your deployment zone. So if you plan that way, defensively, you're going to be bringing them in, baiting them into your objectives, then taking them out. The second one, which is Retrieve Necron Data, which is now the new rod. One of my personal favourites. It's going to work very nicely for your Immortals. If you've got a minion unit of 5 of them, you don't need to roll for it, because they're a troop unit. Because you subtract 1 from the dice roll, so even if you roll a 6, you subtract 1, that makes a 5, which is equal to the amount of Immortals you have in your unit, so they're going to do that secondary no problem. And you can do this straight away, turn 1. Again, you can have 2 different Immortal units either side on 2 objectives, so you can get the first 2 done, turn 1 no problem. Then leave the other 2 for some other units within your Necron list. It could be flayed ones, for example, or your Veil of Darkness relics, going to take some units up there. Your Immortals have done their job, 2 quarters done. 4 points. The next one, Investigate Signal. Now I probably prefer to do this on a Lich Guard unit if I'm honest, because they're more resilient with their shields, but you can opt to do it with an Immortal unit. You just got to get to the centre of the battlefield, stay wholly within 6 inches, do an action, and you're going to be scoring 3 points per battle round. That's providing that there's no enemy units also within 6 inches of the centre of the board. So you've got to kind of plan that. It's probably better on Lich Guard, it probably is better on a Warrior unit, but you've got the option of doing it with your Immortals as well. Then from the Battlefield Supremacy list, Engage on all fronts is an obvious option because they're going to be holding a quarter quite comfortably. Again, if you've got 2 units of Immortals, that's going to be 2 quarters quite comfortably again. You can bring flayed ones down, Veil of Darkness relics, something else. You can quite easily take 4 quarters within a battle round and score the maximum points for Engage on all fronts. Then the final one is Stranglehold. Now this kind of works better when you've got the Nihilak Dynasty or Eternal Conquerors. You're going to be taking over all the objectives, and if you've got more objectives than your opponent does, you're scoring 3 points per battle round. With that Nihilak code, it's quite easy to do. Okay, so comparisons. There's only one unit within the Codex that's worth comparing to the Immortals, and that's the Necron Warriors. They're both troop selections within the Codex. Now, the cheapest troop selection within the Codex is actually the Immortals. Now, I know they're 17 points per model, whereas Warriors are 13 points, but the minimum amount you can take for Warriors is 10, which is going to be 130 points for a min unit of them. So if you wanted the most cost-effective troops, it's going to be your Immortals. It is swings and roundabouts in terms of Immortals v Warriors. Now, of course, Immortals got that toughness 5 as opposed to toughness 4. They've got an additional attack and they've got a better armor save of a 3+, whereas the Warriors have a 4+ armor save. However, when it comes to reanimation protocols, Warriors get to reroll 1s, and they can also have a max unit of 20 of them, which is going to massively aid their reanimation protocols because they're more likely to have models on the tabletop to actually enact your reanimation protocols or your resurrection orbs, your eternity orbs, all that kind of stuff. So it's one of those kind of things again, which one would you prefer? At this moment in time, I like to go with the Immortals, but if I do take Warriors, my list is kind of solely dependent on those Warrior units being active. But for me, the main difference between Warriors and Immortals again are more of a backline defensive kind of unit, whereas the Warriors, they like to go forward, they're on the offense. They can either take the Veil of Darkness relic and use their Gorse Reapers, which are only 12-inch range but they're strength 5, or they're going to be flooding the middle of the board, and you can buff them up with Ghost Arcs, Technomancers, Resurrection Orbs again. They're quite easy to keep intact. So it all depends on your game plan for me. If you're going to do your entire game plan on Warriors, take 20 of them and buff them with all those other units. If you're not that fussed about troops, I'd go with the Immortals. So before getting on to what I think, I wanted to get into our community and see what they think. So I've gone into our Discord where we've got a free server within the channel, and we're simply asking people what they think of a certain unit. So we've got a couple of opinions here, the first one being from Simpino. Immortals A, in the Necron era, they're the go-to for retrieving Necron data, and I can take multiple small units of the Tesla or the Gorse Blaster. They're too squishy to really fight over an objective for more than one turn. The turn after each unit successfully retrieved, I have to decide if they're going to cause only a few wounds or hide them to save no prisoners or grind them down points. Would be better if they can go into a Ghost Arc, 8 out of 10. And then Happy Dude, he has put, I've got a unit of 10 Tesla Immortals, I find them useful for actions and board control, I'll usually have them in reserves, to come out on a table edge turn 2 or 3, interesting. While they aren't great damage dealers to Marines, they can on the occasion blast a small unit off the board in a couple of turns, and they're great for Overwatch. I'm really holding on to the hope that they give them the buff in the next datasheet update. He's not given a rating, but by the sounds of it, he quite likes them. But let's get on to my personal summary. So with limited troops within the Codex, we've only got 2 troop options. You're kind of forced 2 ways. You're either going with your Immortals, or you're going with your Warriors. Now if you are going with your Warriors, in my opinion you should be going with 20 Warriors. Now if you are going with 20 Warriors, you're planning your list around 20 Warriors because of the amount of points it's going to cost you to field those for 260 points for the warriors there. You're going to need some sort of My Will Be Done ability from one of your overlords. You might need a Royal Warden. Maybe you need a Technomancer, or you need a Ghost Ark, and the Resurrection Orbs in there as well. So there's a lot of expense when you're going with warriors. You're kind of funneled into that tactic, building up your warriors, they're the mainstay of your army. Whereas if you're going with the Immortals, they're not the main product of your army, they're just sort of a side piece. They're doing your secondary actions, they're holding your primary objective, they're doing their job, and for cheap as possible, which means you've got more points to spend in other areas of the codex, whether it's your fast attack, your elites, maybe your heavy locust destroyers from your heavy slots. Bottom line, you've got more points to spend elsewhere. But I actually think 85 points for a min unit of Immortals with objectives secured because they're troops is actually pretty decent as a price. So if you compare them to other codexes such as Space Marines, for example, when you go to their cheapest troop selection, which is the Tactical Marines, they're 1 point more expensive than the Immortals are. Okay, they do have an additional wound over our Immortals, but they're not toughness 5 and they've not got reanimation protocols. And that toughness 5 in particular means you're going to have to fire something quite juicy to take them off the board. Your standard bolt guns are going to need 5s to wound, so they're not going to quite do the job unless they're firing in mass, but then they're wasting a lot of weaponry just on your Immortals there. So I keep saying the main reason I'd take these guys is for your secondaries and your primaries. It's just one of their best uses in my opinion, especially with the Shadow Operations secondaries. They're just going to do them straight away turn 1 and then they're free to do what they want. They can fire, they can screen, whatever they're going to do, they're free to go. I actually find myself using them in almost every game nowadays because the troop selection with the warriors, as mentioned, there's such a massive investment when you've got to buff them up with the characters. Because you've spent so much points on them, you don't want to lose them, so then you'll bring in additional things. Resurrection Orbs are 30 points. There's just so many points that you're investing just to keep your 20-man warrior blob alive. Okay, maybe you've got 2 warrior blobs, but that's another investment in itself as well. I'd rather just invest in points in Catan Shards, Scorpet Destroyers, Locust Heavy Destroyers, things that are actually going to do some damage within the game. Keep my troops at a minimum. All they're doing is scoring points. That's what I think in terms of my summary. As for my stamp of approval today, I'd probably give them the competitive stamp. I think they're slightly better than competitive, but they're nowhere near top tier, so they're sort of just in between somewhere. I bring them every game, they get me lots of points, and they do what they're supposed to do. So that's what I think. Let me know what you think below. Also, if you haven't already, check out the Discord. We're chatting about all sorts at the moment. We're doing lists, we're talking about painting schemes, anything to do with Necrons. In fact, we're talking about Tyranids as well, so if you want to get involved, come and join the Discord. There's plenty of people in there to chat to. Other than that guys, all that's left to say, thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.